He's Sully. He's real.
Didn't you just feel like when you met him for the first time, you just feel like really a lazy pussy?
In Hollywood, some stars burn bright, some fade away, and others leave behind a trail of tragedy too heavy to ignore. But then there is Tom Hanks, a man the world knows as America's dad. The kind smile, the soft voice, the one actor who seemed immune to the darkness of fame. On screen, he was the innocent Forrest Gump, the man cast away on a lonely island, the lawyer who fought against injustice, and the captain who would risk everything to save his crew.
Life is easier if you don't need anybody, and it can be a lot easier if you want nothing more than what's in the back of the car.
But behind the curtain, away from the bright lights and golden statues, lived a man who carried wounds deeper than any role he ever played. To millions, Tom Hanks became the face of hope, kindness, and resilience. But what few people know is that his own life was haunted by heartbreak, a broken childhood, a failed first marriage, a son battling addiction and public scandals, and health battles that nearly broke him.
I've been in rehab, right? I've been trying to get my together. A couple months ago, I was selling coke, doing coke until I couldn't even snort it up my nose anymore because it was so clogged. If I can change, you can change. There is a solution.
You know, as a parent, you love your kids unconditionally, and you support them in every step of the way. And you got to applaud bravery and honesty when it actually comes out of out of your own house.
Even as he stood on Oscar stages, applauded by millions, Tom's heart carried a silence few could hear. This is not the fairy tale of Hollywood's golden boy. This is the tragedy of Tom Hanks. To the world, Tom Hanks is untouchable. A man of grace, humility, and warmth in an industry built on arrogance and betrayal. Unlike others, he never spiraled into scandal, never collapsed under the weight of addiction, never courted controversy, or so it seemed. But Hollywood has a cruel habit of hiding truth in shadows. The world saw the smile, but rarely the loneliness behind it. They applauded his roles, but never the price he paid to keep them. His journey begins not in the glitter of stardom, but in a fractured childhood that shaped every wound he would carry for decades. Before the Oscars, before the billions at the box office, before the world crowned him the king of kindness, Tom Hanks was just a lonely little boy, moving from one broken home to another. Born on July 9, 1956, in Concord, California, Tom was the third of 4 children in a family that never knew peace. His parents, Amos and Janet Hanks, divorced when he was just 5 years old, and from that moment stability was stolen from him. Most children cling to home as a place of safety. For Tom, home was always temporary. By the time he reached high school, he had lived in 10 different houses. His father moved the children from city to city, dragging them into new schools, new neighborhoods, and new lives, always uprooting before they had time to settle. Tom would later say he spent much of his youth feeling like an outsider. Every new classroom, every new group of kids, he was the boy who didn't belong.
My younger brother was an infant, and he ended up staying with my mom, and we all went with my dad, who was in the restaurant business. And that's the reason we moved around so much. The restaurant business is all but migrant. Somebody calls and say, hey, I need a guy. They say, well, I can't because, well, we'll pay you this much. Next thing you know, you're loading up the car and off you go. And then you're there for a while, and then he hates the owner, and then he quits and makes a phone call, and 48 hours later, we're living in a completely different city. My joke is my dad would take the 3 of us out on the driveway and say, well, kids, your school is somewhere in that direction. Why don't you just walk that way, and when you see kids your own age, follow them, and they will lead you to the place where you're going to school from now on. And now that's a joke, but it's not that far off.
His father, Amos, was a wandering cook, working odd jobs that never seemed to last. His mother, Janet, drifted away after the divorce. Tom and his siblings were split apart, rarely together under one roof. That fracture carved a hole inside the young boy. While other kids dreamed of baseball games and birthday parties, Tom learned how to pack boxes, say goodbye, and start over. One childhood friend recalled Tom as the quiet kid with big eyes who watched the world instead of joining it. That quiet watching would later become his greatest acting gift, but at the time it only deepened his sense of being invisible. When reality failed him, Tom escaped into imagination. He would sit for hours inventing characters, mimicking voices, studying people. In classrooms, he wasn't the popular kid, he wasn't the athlete, he was the boy at the back of the room, quietly observing every detail. He later admitted, "I was incredibly shy, painfully so. But when I got on stage, something happened. I wasn't me anymore." Theater became his refuge, a world where he could finally belong by becoming someone else. But underneath the laughter of school plays and the applause of small audiences, Tom carried a shadow that would never leave him: the fear of being abandoned. Every move, every divorce, every separation etched a message into his soul. Nothing lasts. People leave. Love disappears. This fear would follow him into adulthood, into his relationships, into his marriage, even into fatherhood. It would make him cling too tightly, and at times, push others away. By the time Tom entered Skyline High School in Oakland, California, he had grown used to being the outsider. He wasn't the star quarterback. He wasn't the rebel. He was the quiet boy who found comfort in drama club. One teacher remembered he was a kid without direction. He had talent, but he didn't know where to put it. He seemed lost. Tom himself admitted in an interview years later, "I didn't have friends. I was a geek. I was painfully shy." Behind that shyness was a teenager who had already lived through more instability than most adults. These early wounds, loneliness, abandonment, insecurity, would shape everything Tom became. They would fuel his empathy as an actor, but they would also haunt his relationships, his health, and his family. The boy who feared being left behind would one day watch his own marriage collapse. The outsider who longed for stability would one day raise a son who spiraled into chaos. And the shy child who used acting to escape would one day use Hollywood itself as his mask. Tom Hanks was on his way to Hollywood, but even as the world prepared to embrace him, his heart was still carrying the scars of a broken boy. Tom Hanks did not march into Hollywood with the confidence of a star. He stumbled in like an outsider, the same lonely boy who never quite belonged, now standing in the most cutthroat town on earth. He enrolled at California State University, Sacramento, but acting was calling. In the late 1970s, he moved to New York with nothing more than determination and a few bags. He wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing a place to belong, but New York City was brutal. Theaters overflowed with young hopefuls. Casting directors barely looked up from their papers. Rejection was the rule, not the exception. Tom was broke, exhausted, and painfully insecure. He often wondered if he'd made a mistake. In 1980, Tom landed his first real shot, the TV sitcom Bosom Buddies. The premise was ridiculous: two men dressing as women, just to afford cheap rent in a female-only apartment. It was far from the dream role, but for Tom it was survival. The show gave him visibility, but it also locked him in as the funny guy. Behind the smile, Tom feared he was being typecast. Would Hollywood ever take him seriously? The boy who once feared abandonment was now abandoned by Hollywood itself. Tom auditioned endlessly, competing against actors with sharper looks, louder personalities, and stronger connections. Casting directors praised him for being likable. But in Hollywood, likable didn't pay rent. He took small TV roles, bit parts, anything to stay afloat. But behind the camera, doubt ate away at him. He took small TV roles, bit parts, anything to stay afloat. But behind the camera, doubt ate away at him. He still carried the weight of his broken childhood, the insecurity, the need for acceptance, the fear of being forgotten. Friends recalled Tom wandering the streets of Los Angeles late at night, thinking about giving up. He wasn't chasing stardom anymore, he was chasing survival. Then, in 1984, came the role that changed everything, Splash. Tom played a man who falls in love with a mermaid. an unusual fantasy comedy that shocked everyone by becoming a box office hit. Overnight, Tom Hanks was no longer the struggling TV actor. He was a movie star, but Hollywood is cruel. Stardom doesn't erase insecurity. It magnifies it. Tom now faced a new battle. Could he sustain this success, or would he become another one-hit wonder? The roles kept coming: Bachelor Party, Big Turner, and Hooch. Each one pulled him deeper into the spotlight. Fans adored him. Directors wanted him. But with every success came crushing pressure. Tom feared failure constantly. He feared letting audiences down. And more than anything, he feared being forgotten, the same way his parents had left him behind as a boy. Behind closed doors, Tom admitted to friends that Hollywood felt like an endless audition. Every movie was a test. Every review was a verdict on his worth. Throughout the 1980s, Tom became Hollywood's go-to nice guy. He was the funny, lovable everyman. But inside, he felt trapped. Comedy was his mask. Behind the laughs, his life was far from happy. At home, his marriage was crumbling. His young family felt the weight of his absences, his insecurities, and his growing obsession with success. Tom's first marriage to Samantha Luz was breaking under the pressure, setting the stage for one of the most painful chapters of his life. The world thought Tom Hanks was rising, but behind the scenes, he was losing the one thing that mattered most: his family. By the late 1980s, Tom Hanks was no longer the struggling outsider. He was a star. Audiences loved him. Directors trusted him. Studios banked on him. But with success came a new burden: the crushing weight of expectation. Tom had clawed his way out of obscurity. Now he was trapped in something far more dangerous: the role of perfection. In 1988, Tom starred in Big, the story of a boy who magically wakes up in the body of a man. The performance was iconic. Critics called it pure magic. Audiences fell in love with Tom's wide-eyed innocence. Tom received his first Academy Award nomination. He had arrived, but privately, he confessed the pressure was unbearable. Every new role was a gamble. Every box office number felt like a judgment on his worth as both an actor and a man. Hollywood had decided who Tom Hanks was: the lovable everyman, the clean-cut hero, the safe star. But that image became a prison. Tom wanted depth, pain, and authenticity in his work. The studios wanted family comedies. He began to feel like a product, packaged, polished, and sold to the world. Inside, the insecure boy from his childhood resurfaced, whispering, "You'll never be enough." Years of absences, the stress of Hollywood, and Tom's growing obsession with his career had created distance too wide to fix. In 1987, the marriage ended in divorce. For Tom, it was shattering. He later admitted, "I was just too young and insecure for marriage. I didn't know how to be a husband." Divorce left him with guilt that never fully healed. He had failed the very thing he feared most: family, and the pain of breaking apart from Samantha left deep scars that followed him into every relationship afterward. Through the late 1980s and early 1990s, Tom's star only grew brighter. Philadelphia, Forrest Gump, Apollo 13. Roles that weren't just movies, they became cultural landmarks. He won back-to-back Oscars. His face became synonymous with trust, decency, and hope. But with every standing ovation, Tom felt the gap between who the world thought he was and who he really was growing wider. Hollywood worshipped Tom Hanks, but Tom Hanks did not worship himself. By the mid-1990s, Tom was at the top of the world, yet lonelier than ever. In interviews, he smiled. On red carpets, he waved. On stage, he thanked his family and colleagues. But when the lights went out, Tom admitted to friends he often sat in silence, exhausted and empty. The boy who grew up with abandonment still feared that everyone would leave. He threw himself into work, desperate to fill the void. Movies became therapy. Roles like the stranded man in Castaway weren't just performances, they were reflections of his own loneliness. Audiences adored him. They saw him as the perfect man: loyal, kind, dependable. But perfection is heavy. He once confessed, "People see me as this reliable guy, but I'm not always that. I've made mistakes. I carry guilt. I'm not the saint people imagine. Stardom had given him everything: fame, wealth, recognition. But it also cost him the very things he craved most: stability, family, and peace. And soon, that cost would grow even heavier. Because while Tom's career soared into the stratosphere, his personal battles as a father, a husband, and a man were only beginning. Behind every Hollywood smile, there is a story of heartbreak. For Tom Hanks, that heartbreak began not on stage, not on screen, but in his own home. In the mid-1970s, long before the Oscars and the billion-dollar box office, Tom Hanks was just a struggling young actor. It was during this uncertain time that he fell in love with Samantha Luz. She was an actress too, sharing his passion and his dreams. Together they built a fragile life out of cheap apartments, hand-to-mouth survival, and the hope that one day their sacrifices would pay off. In 1978, Tom was only 21 years old when they married. They had 2 children, Colin and Elizabeth Hanks. For a brief moment, it looked like Tom had built the stable family he never had as a child. But the truth was darker. Tom would later admit he was far too young and far too insecure to handle marriage and fatherhood. The ghosts of his childhood followed him into his new family, leaving him with deep insecurities, an obsession with work, and a fear of abandonment. As Tom chased Hollywood roles, the distance with Samantha only grew. What began as love fractured into silence and resentment. Friends recalled how Tom threw himself into acting not only to provide, but to escape the crumbling marriage at home. By 1987, after nearly a decade together, the marriage ended in divorce. For Tom, it was devastating. He confessed later, "I was just too young. I didn't know how to be married. I didn't know what it meant. And when it ended, I felt like I had failed at everything." The guilt was crushing. He had wanted most of all to build a stable family, yet instead repeated the very cycle of abandonment that haunted him since childhood. That scar never fully closed. Amid this collapse, Tom found himself drawn to Rita Wilson. They had first met in 1981 on Bosom Buddies and reconnected during Volunteers in 1985. The chemistry was undeniable. Though still married, Tom was already drifting away. Hollywood whispered. Tabloids speculated. Is a midigno vetnitsari sad dura netari? Was it betrayal or salvation? Tom insisted it was love that felt inevitable, like coming home. In 1988, just a year after his divorce, Tom married Rita. To the public it looked like a fairy tale, but behind the smiles Tom carried the scars of his past. Afraid of failing again, he clung to Rita with desperate devotion. She became his anchor, his lifeline, and yet that weight was heavy. Then tragedy struck. Samantha Luz, his first wife, was diagnosed with bone cancer. Despite their history, Tom stood by her side. In 2002, Samantha died at just 49 years old. For Tom, her death reopened old wounds, guilt, sorrow, and the memory of a love that once was. Tom had found stability with Rita, but the shadows of loss and guilt never left him. His second marriage gave him strength. Yes, but it also exposed him to new pain. Because while Tom tried to be the perfect husband, he would soon face the painful cost of being a father to the world. Tom Hanks was the flawless family man. But behind closed doors, his children's struggles nearly destroyed him. For decades, Tom Hanks was Hollywood's most trusted face, the man who could do no wrong. With films like Forrest Gump, Castaway, and Saving Private Ryan, he became America's dad, the symbol of kindness and stability. But behind the applause and the perfect smile was a man carrying heartbreak, family turmoil, and battles with his own body. His children reflected the cracks in his picture-perfect image. Colin, his eldest son, followed his father into Hollywood with hope. But no matter his talent, he was always introduced as Tom Hanks's son. Every stumble, every role that didn't shine was magnified under his father's shadow. Elizabeth, Tom's only daughter, lived an even sadder fate, largely forgotten. Divorce pulled her from her father's orbit, and while she built a quiet career as a writer, the public never saw her. Only Tom, Truman, the youngest, avoided fame altogether, working behind the camera. Yet even in silence, He could never escape the question, how do you live up to a man like Tom Hanks? But it was Chet Hanks who became the family's most painful scandal. Wild, rebellious, and outspoken, Chet's struggles with addiction, arrests, rehab, and viral controversies clashed violently with Tom's wholesome reputation. From fake accents to aggressive outbursts, Chet's antics became tabloid fuel. For Tom, who had built his life on humility and grace, every headline was not just embarrassment, was heartbreak. Friends say behind closed doors, he worried constantly about losing his son. And then tragedy struck Tom himself. After years of grueling physical transformations for roles, starving for Castaway, losing weight for Philadelphia, his health began to fail. In 2013, he revealed he had type 2 diabetes, the result of decades of punishing his body for his art. 7 years later, in 2020, the world gasped when Tom and his wife, Rita Wilson, became the first global celebrities to announce they had contracted COVID-19. For fans, it was a shocking reminder that even Tom Hanks was not invincible. Yet perhaps the greatest tragedy was the one no headline captured. Despite fame, Tom often confessed to feelings of isolation and regret. He admitted he sometimes felt like an imposter, waiting to be exposed. He regretted the collapse of his first marriage. He regretted not always being present for his children. And though the world saw him as the man who saved everyone on screen, in his private life he often felt powerless, unable to save his daughter from invisibility, unable to save his son from addiction, unable to save himself from the cost of being everyone's hero. Tom Hanks's story is more than Hollywood glory. It is the story of a man who gave everything to the world, his kindness, his body, his soul, and in return, carried wounds that applause could never heal. And maybe that is his greatest tragedy. The world never allowed him to simply be human. Thank you for watching. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to subscribe and support Vintage Spotlight, where the untold stories of Hollywood's legends finally come to light.